Good evening, producer Susan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jersey Joe. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Still waiting for our first flakes of snow here in New Jersey. Got my snowblower all mounted, waiting to do something, but so far no snow in sight. It doesn't look like anything between now and Super Bowl. So grass is green and the streets are dry. So that's where we
And
are.
who are you rooting for the Super Bowl?
Well, since I put $100 bet on the Eagles to win the Super Bowl on November 13th, that would pay me $600. I'm rooting for the Eagles to win the Super Bowl. You got to have, even though I've had New York Giants tickets in my family for 50 years, I bet on the Eagles to win the Super Bowl on November 13th. So that's where we are. So, and I think they're a slight favorite over the Chiefs this Sunday. So you got a favor. Of course, you're Pennsylvania. I assume you have to be an Eagles fan.
Nope, because I was born and raised a Giants fan. So by definition, I cannot root for the Eagles.
Can't root for the Eagles. So you're going for the Chiefs?
Yep.
All right. Well, that's you and my wife. My wife is a diehard Kansas City Chiefs fan. She loves I can't ever pronounce his Mahomes. She loves Mahomes.
Patrick Mahomes, yeah.
She loves Patrick Mahomes. Anyway, Jersey Joe Show, the focus of the show, news and perspective you won't hear on TV. You'll hear about some stories tonight I guarantee you haven't heard on TV. And you may hear about some stories that you may have heard about, but you may hear a slightly different slant on those TV stories. So it's news and perspective you won't hear on TV. Our quote of the day will be from science fiction author Isaac Azimov on evidence-based beliefs. Last week, we started a new segment called The Stupidest Thing I Heard All Week. And this week, we have two contenders, one by Joe Biden on the percentage of women in his administration, and the other on a Democratic congressman blaming the Trump tax cuts for our 1.6 trillion deficit. And I'm going to let producer Susan pick this week's winner. Last week, we talked about New York City, trying to move migrants around, playing hot potato with illegal immigrants. This week, we're going to talk about how they're buying them bus tickets to go to Canada, even though Canada won't take them. Well, by the way, did you hear about the city of Philadelphia is trying to hire lifeguards for their pools this summer, and they're hiring lifeguards who can't swim? Did you hear about that one?
Yeah, I don't think I want to go swimming in the city of Philadelphia.
All right, and we'll talk about how the city of Philadelphia is trying to recruit lifeguards who can't swim. In our health minute, everybody talks about universal health care. Well, over the past couple of months, there have been growing reports about how the universal health care programs in both Great Britain and Canada are failing horrible, with people waiting months and months and months for desperately needed surgery and cancer treatment. And so we're going to talk about how it's collapsing there, how it did collapse in Venezuela, and how much in taxes do the residents of those countries pay for that, quote, free health care. We're going to talk about a truly outrageous plea deal that was offered to a child rapist in Minnesota, and why you vote for county prosecutors and judges in local elections really matter. We'll talk about our self-avowed millionaire socialist senator from Vermont who's decided to embrace capitalism by charging people as much as $95 a head to listen to him speak on the evils of capitalism. Did you hear that story?
No, I did not.
We'll file that under irony. And in case you hadn't heard it, we'll talk about how the Democrats in Congress gave themselves a $34,000 raise in December, just before control of the House changed over to Republicans on January 3rd. So we'll let you know about the $34,000 raise they gave. You heard all about that, right? The media covered that $34,000 raise. Yeah, it was the lead story in all the news stations, right?
Yeah.
And we'll tell you about by the ATF has been commissioned a year ago to compile a 4-volume statistics on guns, stolen guns, illegal gun use. And last week they released volume 2 of that gun study. And we'll, depending on how much time we have left, we'll go into some of the details and what the ATF has found in their studies of guns and stolen guns and use of illegal guns. And in this week's Taxpayer Relief Shot comes to us from Fort Smith, Arkansas, and it's a story about what happens when you're a stupid criminal and you decide to bring a knife to a gunfight. Do you want to guess how that one turns out?
Yeah.
All right. So you've heard of Isaac Azimov, right?
I have not.
You've never heard of Isaac Azimov, one of the most famous. I believe he's deceased now, but I believe he's also the guy that came up with the 3 laws of robotics. You familiar with the 3 laws of robotics?
No.
Oh, I may have to do a quick detour here. These are famous. In fact, they were quoted. Like, I remember the Will Smith story about uh, the robot, iRobot. If you've never heard of the three laws of robotics, these are classic, and they're in all the science fiction stories. There we go. Three laws of robotics. All right. Here are the rules of robotics, and these were penned by Isaac Azimov back in, I think, the 80s. Number one, a robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. Two, a robot must obey orders given it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. In other words, I can't tell a robot, kill Susan. That would be a violation of the first law. Three, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. Those are Isaac Asimov's three laws of robotics. What do you think of those three laws? They make sense?
Yeah, I feel like now that you've said them out loud, I've heard them in like Terminator movies or, you know.
Yep. And I think in the movie I, Robot with the Will Smith, they're figured there. But those are the three. A robot can't injure a human or through inaction allow a human to come to harm. Must obey orders given by a human unless it would violate the first law. And a robot must protect itself unless such protection would conflict with the first or second law. So I didn't intend to go there, but as long as it came up. So that was anyway, but here's his famous science fiction, great thinker. And here's his quote on believing. He said, I believe in observation. I believe in measurement and reasoning confirmed by independent observers. I'll believe anything, no matter how wild or seemingly ridiculous, if there is evidence for it. However, the wilder and more ridiculous something is, the firmer and more solid the evidence will have to be. What do you think of his quote?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard some pretty outrageous things. And rather than just say BS, I don't believe it, I'll say, prove it, show me. I'll keep the open mind.
Mm-hmm.
But the more outrageous you're going, and by the way, both conservatives and liberals, they make these ridiculous claims and whatnot. And I'll say, okay, yeah, I'm skeptical, but convince me. And that's kind of Isaac Asimov, that he believes in observation, measurement, and reasoning, but there's got to be evidence. Just don't tell him something. What's the old saying? Don't blow smoke up my butt. All right. All right. We have producer's choice this week. We have two quotes, one by President Biden about what the percentage of women in his cabinet are, and the other by Congressman Brad Sherman. He was on Bloomberg. Now, this year, the budget deficit is projected to come in around 1.5, 1.6 trillion. Now, the most pessimistic prediction of the Trump tax plan was a reduction in tax revenues of 190 billion per year. It was 1.9 trillion over 10 years. So if you take 1.9 trillion divided by 10, that's 190 billion per year. That was the worst case, most pessimistic, because it was based on a static forecasting model that did not allow for any increase in economic activity as a result of the rate cuts. And in fact, because of the cut in tax rates, we are now setting all-time new record highs for tax revenues. We just set another back-to-back year for record high tax revenues, far above the level of tax revenue that would have been predicted had the old Obama tax plan been left in place. But you're going to hear this Congressman Brad Sherman from California blame our $1.5 trillion deficit on, quote, the Trump tax plan. So do you want to hear his prediction about blaming Trump for the deficit, or you want to hear Biden talk about how many women are in his cabinet first?
I think I want to hear about how many women he thinks are in his cabinet, because I want to save the other one for next week after we hear the State of the Union address.
Oh, okay. Well, we can do both, because I'll have more stupid stuff, and I'm sure things he'll say tonight. So here's Biden talking about not how many, but the percentage of women in his cabinet that are women. And here we go. I'm going to turn up the volume a little bit here. He'll repeat it 2 or 3 times here.
more than half the women in my cabinet, more than half the people in my cabinet, more than half of the women in my administration are women.
More than half.
More than half the women in my cabinet,
More than half the women in my cabinet are women. You want me to play that again?
Yeah.
More than half the women in my administration are women. Here we go. Hey.
more than half the people in my cabinet, more than half of the women in my administration are women.
More than half the women in my administration are women. So what are the other half is my question. If only half, if 55% are women, what are the other 45%? Maybe we shouldn't go there. All right. Let's go to Congressman Brad Sherman blaming that in the face of record high tax revenues, we're still under the Trump tax plan. Here's Congressman Brad Sherman trying to blame a 1.5 trillion annual budget deficit on the Trump tax plan. Here we go.
But yes, we need to be looking at the overall structure, and it can't just be on spending. It also has to be on taxes. The Trump tax cut continues to hobble our ability to collect revenue.
The Trump tax cut, now it was a tax rate cut, not a revenue cut. So, quote, to hobble our ability to collect revenues, I'm really not sure where he gets that. So if you had to pick between those two, which one of those two is the stupidest quote of the stupidest thing I've heard all week?
I think the woman cabinet members.
Yeah, I think the other one is not stupid. It's just a knowing lie. So I guess we have to distinguish between stupid and knowing lie. I think he knows it's a lie, but he says it anyway. All right. I want to talk about a plea deal that happened earlier. Actually, it happened late last week in Minnesota, in Rochester, Minnesota, involving a man charged with raping 2 small children. But before I do that, over the weekend, a local story here you probably didn't hear about. There was an off-duty New York City cop went to buy a used car that was advertised on Facebook Marketplace. I'm sure you're familiar with Facebook.
I actually did hear that.
But in Facebook Marketplace, people advertise stuff, and it's not uncommon to say, because they don't want to take a check, they don't want to take a money order that's easily fake. So most of the stuff that goes on Facebook Marketplace is cash only. Now, if you're smart, you'll agree to say, okay, I'll meet you, whether you're going to buy an Xbox or a used car or, a flat screen TV, you're going to say, I'll meet you in the parking lot of the local police station, right? That's because, that's where you're going to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
This off-duty cop agrees to meet this guy in a shopping center parking lot in the dark. And he's got like $12,000 and $100 bills in his pocket for this used car. And it's a setup. The guy there is a convicted felon, pulls out a gun and says, give me the money. This is a robbery. Of course, he doesn't know the guy's an off-duty cop. They exchange shots. The off-duty cop gets shot in the head and is in critical condition. He's in life support. They don't know if he's going to live. Here's what gets me. The guy's 38 years old, convicted felon in possession of a gun. You want to guess how many prior felony arrests this 38-year-old guy had?
Oh, probably a dozen.
Try 22. Now, you're 38 years old. You've been arrested 22 times on felonies. What are you doing out on the street?
Yeah, why are they walking free?
Why are you walking free? 22 felony arrests, your third. I mean, even if he was, and that's only, who knows how many juvenile. This is just from the time he was 18 forward. So in 20 years, he had 22 prior felony arrests. I assume he had to spend some time in prison. But this guy has probably spent, 70% or 80% of the last 20 years in prison. Yet here he is still out. I just think if you do 22 prior felonies, at age 38, you should probably still be in jail. By the way, you've heard of the 3 strikes and you're out rule, right?
I was just thinking of why, if he was arrested on 22 felonies, that's well beyond the 3 strikes you're out rule.
Well, New York State doesn't have that rule. And I actually think it's not a good rule because in some cases, your third offense can be something like relatively minor, like shoplifting, and you can go to jail for life for shoplifting. If I were king, rather than a 3 strikes and you're out, I would do what I call the double up rule. That every time you are convicted of a felony, the statutory penalties on your next conviction automatically double. So let's say that you had a prior felony and you committed grand larceny, you stole something that was worth $1,500. And let's say it was 5 to 10 was the normal statutory penalty. Well, if you have one prior, 5 to 10 becomes 10 to 20. If you had two prior felonies, 10 to 20 becomes 20 to 40. Because, that way you're not going to life for shoplifting. So what do you think of the double up concept?
Yeah, that's an interesting spin on things.
Yeah. Anyway, so let's go to Rochester, Minnesota last week. So there's this guy. He's when he was a teenager, he was I think a 17 or 18-year-old janitor in a grammar school. Gauge kindergarten through 6th grade. He raped several times a 4-year-old girl and a 9-year-old girl. Now, the 4-year-old girl, it's been 4 years. The 4-year-old is now 8, and the 9-year-old is now 13. Prosecution had all the evidence. They had DNA. They had, physical evidence, that the girls had been subject to sexual intercourse, and they had his DNA. So the prosecution had an airtight case. Now, I understand you don't want to put, a 13-year-old girl on the stand and make her relive this, but at the same time, this guy is dangerous. Now, so the prosecution offered him a plea deal. Now, judges are under no obligation to accept the plea deal. They have to look at the reasonableness. So if producer Susan, if you were the judge in this case and the prosecution said, this man is pleading no contest to raping 2 girls, ages 4 and 9. He's pleaded no contest. Here's all the evidence. And here's the plea that we've offered and he's willing to accept. If you were Judge Susan, what's the minimum sentence you would accept in a plea deal?
Rape is a horrible crime, but I think rape of a child is a whole nother level. I'd say no less than 10 years.
Easily 10 years. Easily 10.
Minimum.
Yeah, and of course, with time off for good behavior, even if the guy got 20, he could be out in 12, right?
Mm-hmm.
The prosecution offered, and the judge accepted 6 months in jail and not even a guilty plea. There's a plea called nolo contendere, which is not that I plead guilty. It means nolo contendere means no contest in Latin. It means simply, I am pleading that if this were to go to trial, I would probably lose. No contest. I don't think I could win, but I'm not pleading guilty. So it's a plea of no contest. Now, the significance of a nolo contendere plea in this case is that since he's not pleading guilty, when he completes his 6-month term, he does not have to register as a sex offender. So this guy who has raped 2 small children will not be listed as a registered sex offender. How outrageous was both the prosecutor offering that deal and the judge for accepting it?
Yeah, the judge and the district attorney both need to be
gone. Right. Now, I want to point out that the county attorney, by the way, whose name was Mark Ostrom, has been repeatedly reelected to his position as county prosecutor by the residents of Olmsted County, Minnesota. And the judge, whose name is Judge Jacob Allen, he was initially appointed to his position as district court judge by the prior Democratic governor. Trying to remember the governor's name, Democrat Governor Mark Dayton, who appointed him to fill a vacancy. And then unfortunately with most judgeships, when people get the ballot, they don't recognize the name. It's just for re-election. He's the incumbent. They just check, sure, why not? Well, this guy, Jacob Allen, was reelected to his position in 2020 by people who didn't bother to do the research, didn't care. And the reason I'm making such a big deal of this is that if you don't want to see criminals like that guy with 22 prior felony arrests who shot the cop, or this child rapist who's going to be free on the street in 6 months, it matters who you elect as district attorney and who you elect as judge. So please don't just check the box when next time you get a ballot, which is only about going to be, 20 months from now, you're going to get a ballot for the upcoming 2024 elections.
Mm-hmm.
So please just don't check the box. All right. Let's talk about Philadelphia recruiting lifeguards who can't swim. So Philadelphia has a rather extensive network of public outdoor pools. There's a lot of low income housing, and the kids there, can't. They're, a lot of them are disadvantaged. They're living in public housing. So public pools, city operated public pools, particularly in the housing projects, are very, very important. To keep the kids cool in the summer, and the mothers take the kids there. So it's crucial.
And
But
keep them out of trouble.
keep them out of trouble, keep them in the water, keep them cool, keep them off the street. So it's great. But there's a housing shortage, and not a housing, there's a labor shortage, and some of the kids don't want to work. Now they're offering like $18 an hour plus a sign-on bonus, but they're so desperate that they haven't been able to get enough teenagers and young adults to apply for the lifeguard position. So they said, hey, we know the previous ad said you had to be able to swim. We're dropping that requirement. We will teach you, if you can't swim, apply anyway, and we'll teach you how to swim, fingers crossed. So, and that's hopefully, so I don't know, how comfortable would you be swimming if you were a novice swimmer with a lifeguard who 90 days ago didn't know how to swim?
No. And as a parent, you wouldn't want your child going down there.
Right. So again, if you're a parent in Philadelphia and you're going to take your kids to a Philadelphia city-run pool, my suggestion is be your kid's own lifeguard. I wouldn't want to rely on the city recruiting people who are lifeguards that didn't know how to swim 90 days ago. So that's the current plan. All right. So the game of hot potato, right? Somebody's got a hot potato, you throw it to one person, they throw it. So last week we talked about, the immigrants, the hot potato, where are we going to put them? They tried to get him out of the hotel. They tried to put him on the barracks out by the pier, and in 90 days you're going to need the pier for the cruise ships. So now the city has offered their immigrants in New York City a bus ticket to anywhere they want to go. And they said, we'll pay for that. Just tell us where you want to go. Anyway, word got out that Canada was a friendly place. So a lot of them are asking for bus tickets to Montreal, and the city's saying, oh, you want to go to Montreal? Come down to Port Authority. Here's your bus ticket. And the bus leaves at, 3 o'clock in the morning. That's about a 5-hour bus right now. Here's the only issue. You're buying them bus tickets to places like Montreal and Toronto. But what do you think the problem is going to be when the bus gets to the border?
I was going to say, Canada's probably not wanting to accept all of these.
Exactly. And the city of New York knows that so they're basically saying, oh yeah, Montreal, great, here's your bus ticket. So they're basically sending them off to a place that they know they're never going to get to, but from their perspective, they're out of New York City. So
what happens at the border? Where do they go?
Oh, they're going to turn the bus around and say, sorry, these people can't come in, turn around, go somewhere else.
Where does the bus go? Back to New York City?
Back to New York City or Plattsburgh or whatever.
Or Buffalo? I mean, does Buffalo get all these people? Or
well, remember last week, Governor Hochul said that she was going to try to start locating these people in upstate New York cities and towns. They're like Syracuse and Rochester and Buffalo. We're going to see how that goes over, probably like a lead balloon. But it's, I've been just making bowl after bowl of popcorn watching this play out. It's like a comedy here, and it gets better every week. So we should know by next week what's happened to all these busloads of people heading for the Canadian border that are never going to be admitted into Canada. So that's going to be fun to watch this week. Anyway, if you're a congressman in Washington, D.C., do you know how much you get paid?
Probably a lot more than me. I'm going to say at least 6 figures.
About $176,000 a year. So here's the deal. So if you want to run for Congress, and I'd say, so if you want to run for Congress, here's the deal. If you win the election and get the job, you get paid $176,000 a year, and the U.S. government will pay for your commuting expenses. If you have to fly back and forth between Washington, D.C. and Washington, for meetings. And by the way, you only spend about 20 weeks a year in Washington between, summer recess and, Congress isn't in session every week. And you have to spend about 20 weeks a year in New York City, and we'll pay for your commute, but we won't pay for your living expenses. So when you're in D.C., you have to buy your own meals, and you have to, pay your own hotel if you want to get an apartment. That's up to you. Would you take the job for $176,000 a year if you had to pay for your own housing 20 weeks a year?
Yeah, I mean, I realize that real estate is probably considerably pricier, but yeah.
Yeah, but you can stay in a Days Inn, a Hampton Inn, for about $150 a night. And if you want to go home every weekend, they'll pay for your plane ride home on the weekends.
Yeah.
So But anyway, so the Democrats in December, just before their term expired, they decide, it's really expensive to be here those 20 weeks a year. So they voted themselves a $34,000 per year tax-free pay raise. It's an expense, but they even allow you to take your meals. Now, when you're at work during the day, do you have to pay for your own lunch?
I actually am blessed. I do have a meal plan.
Oh, so your employer buys you lunch?
Yes,
Okay.
I that is a very nice perk of my job that I realize is a great privilege.
Do they buy you dinner and breakfast?
No, just lunch.
Well,
And an occasional coffee. I do get
Okay.
the occasional coffee.
Well, this $34,000 allowance is to cover any and all meal expenses, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which, by the way, if they were home, they'd have to pay for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And any and all dry cleaning, any other incidental living expenses. So they're getting $34,000 a year on top of their 176. And I'm not real good at math, but what's 176 plus 34?
That sounds about, let's see, 176 plus 34. Yeah, it's 210.
They're now getting 210. And that last 34,000, by the way, is not taxable income. It doesn't show up in their W-2 because it's expense reimbursement. So they're getting 176,000 on their W-2 and another 34,000 tax-free to quote cover their living expenses. I think if you ran for the office and accepted the position, knowing upfront that you had to pay for your own housing and meals and dry cleaning while you're in DC,
Yeah.
that's part of the deal. So why should we give you another 34,000?
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm more aggravated about, the fact that they did it or the fact that the news media chose not to cover it. I don't know which one aggravates you more, if either one.
I think the media not covering it.
Yep.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's both. It's the people accepting it and the media not covering it, keeping them honest.
So when I talk about, the situation in news and perspective, you won't hear on TV. I guarantee you that's one of the news stories that 90% of the people or more listening to this podcast didn't hear about the $34,000 pay raise because it was just a media blackout. Well, nothing to see here, move along. But so your elected congressman is now getting $210,000 a year, of which only 176 shows up on their W-2 form. All right, how are we doing on time?
You got about 5 minutes left.
All right, then I have to make this quick. Bernie's got a new book out. He's on a book tour. His book is Denouncing the Evils of Capitalism. And he's charging, depending what the venue is, $95 per head to attend his speaking, because he's giving a speaking engagement at the book tour.
Now, that's not a very socialist fee structure.
No, particularly when your book is denouncing the evils of capitalism. And again, you just Google Bernie $95 a head book tour, and you'll hear about it. I'm gonna have to skip over the ATF gun study about how many guns were stolen. We'll get to that next week. But let's move on to our taxpayer relief shot. And again, the reason we call them taxpayer relief shots is because if the police arrest a thug and they have to, goes to trial, it's a court-appointed attorney, very expensive. He goes to jail. It's $80,000 a year to keep him in jail. And so when the homeowner or somebody shoots a thug or a robber and he dies at the scene, you save the taxpayers the cost of those jury trials, court-appointed attorneys, probation, 10 years in prison. And here's how the sheriff of Santa Rosa County, Florida, feels about shooting thugs.
Somebody's breaking in your house, you're more than welcome to shoot them in Santa Rosa County. We prefer that you do, actually. Hopefully you'll save the taxpayers money.
All right, and that was the sheriff of Santa Rosa County. And also out of Florida, here's Sheriff Grady Judge, how he feels about it. Let me see if I can find Sheriff Grady Judge.
I would highly suggest that if a looter breaks into your home, comes into your home while you're there to steal stuff, that you take your gun and you shoot him. You shoot him so that he looks like grated cheese.
And I just love those quotes. So again, it's not me. Obviously you've got two law enforcement officers feel the same way. They actually prefer that you shoot the guys because, by the way, when you put a thug on trial, it's not just the thug and the court appointed. You have to have the deputies and the officers have to be taken off the street and go testify in court. I mean, it's just an expensive interference with the day-to-day operation. So here is our taxpayer relief shot from Fort Smith, Arkansas, about a thug that brings a knife to a gunfight. Here we go.
Police are not naming the homeowner or the person who was shot. They say there was a struggle inside the house before the shooting happened.
It was reported to us as a self-defense type shooting.
Just before 10 this morning, Fort Smith police say the homeowner here at North 18th and H Street called and said that someone had broken into his house and he shot them. Police say the man had a knife and that there was a struggle inside the house. The homeowner, a 58-year-old man, was taken to the hospital. Police were not able to say if he'd been stabbed, but they say his injuries are non-life threatening. And the other man.
Upon arrival, our officers discovered a 29-year-old male here at the scene who had suffered a fatal gunshot wound to the abdomen.
Oh, I'm going to pause right here. So you got a 29-year-old thug and a 58-year-old guy. If the 58-year-old guy didn't have a gun, how do you think that would have come out, 29-year-old against a 58-year-old?
Yeah, the 29-year-old probably would have won unless, the 58-year-old was some sort of, bodybuilder.
Right. So this again, was it same old cult? The gun made him equal. So, the gun's the great equalizer. So let's continue.
Police are still investigating, but they do not think the two men knew each other. The house sits right next to Grand Avenue, where there's a lot of foot traffic. There are no trespassing signs posted. They're also on other houses in the neighborhood. Police say they had a report earlier of a man trying to break into a house not far from where the shooting happened. Right now, police are not certain if it was the same 29-year-old man who was shot. Police say the shooting appears to be in self-defense. They say the prosecutor will review the case to determine if it was justified. And tonight, police are working to learn more information about the man who died. In Fort Smith, Brett Rains, 4029.
Sounds justified.
Yeah, sounds justified to me. I don't know. I guess they have to go through the motions, but it sounds pretty straight. Whoop, hang on. Let me close this off here. Sounds pretty clear cut to me. A 29-year-old stranger with a knife breaks into your house and confronts you.
Mhm.
And you shoot him so he looks like Swiss cheese. So I don't know what there is to investigate, but I guess they got to cross the I's and dot the T's. But so a word to thug, by the way, don't bring knives to gunfights. It generally is not going to work out well for you. And with that, I've got nothing else, Producer Susan, unless you have something you want to add or any comment on tonight's show.
Yeah, what are your predictions on the State of the Union?
I made myself a bingo card with all the buzzwords. Equity.
Are you going to play bingo?
Yeah, I'm going to play State of the Union bingo. I've got the typical 25 words. I've got social justice, police use of force, equity, reduced taxes, jobs, inflation, job growth. I mean, I've got all the buzzwords on there, so I'm going to see how long. I'm sure I'm going to get bingo. It's just a question of how many minutes into a speech before I get bingo. Any thoughts?
I don't know. I always feel like the State of the Unions drag on forever.
They do. So anyway, so you can do something else. You're going to watch it or just wait for the highlights?
No, I'm not going to watch it. I'll watch the highlights afterwards.
All right. Well,
I just can't bring myself to listen to those for 2 hours.
Part of my job is to watch it, so I guess I'm going to have to bite.
And this is why I have you to fill me in on what happens.
Yeah, my job to bite the bullet. All right, Producer Susan. Well, thanks for your help, and if you folks, I appreciate you giving up the time. If you want to email me with suggestions or watch the podcast, it's Joe at JerzeeJoe.com, JERZEE. And the website is JerzeeJoe.com. And with that, I'll sign off.
Yeah,
Night,
and
Producer Sue.
haters are gonna hate, but go Chiefs.
Go Chiefs. All right. Good night, Producer Sue.
Night.